Imagine, a podcast series by Imagine Theatre.
Hello again and welcome to episode 58 of this podcast series, and this time we're going to get the latest news from Imagine Theatre and find out what's been happening this summer.
For more information, go to their website at www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.
First of all, I hope you enjoyed the last episode when I spoke to the man whose stage debut came at the age of 11. He's a recipient of an Olivier Be Inspired Award, a former chief executive of Noda, and at the turn of the millennium was there when the company we now know as Imagine began, Mark Thorburn. So remember, that and all of the other previous episodes are still available to download. All you have to do is go to where you normally get your podcast from, and while you're at it, why not subscribe so that you don't miss out on the future? This time, I'm here at Imagine headquarters to chat to Managing Director Steve Boden, catching up with what's been happening with little more than 3 months to go until the next panto season. First of all, Steve, can you believe it?
I can't believe it. I mean, we always say you get to June and you go, oh, that's the end of the first half of the year. The second half of the year starts, and here we are in the middle of summer, and it's full steam ahead. And you can even see in the morning when the sun is rising a bit later and the nights are drawing in. Goodness, we are on the way.
Busy time. You've had photo shoots and all sorts of other things going on. Tell us where you are.
So this is the time of year where actually people start to join the company to get on with some of the jobs that require specialist help. So we bring carpenters and painters into the company. They've got a big refurb project on. We try and do a lot of that over the summer when the weather's better and they can start to spread outside. Obviously, it's a bit wet at the moment, so a lot of that's being done indoors. But yeah, glittering is a big thing, making sure that all the glitter on the panto sets is fresh, giving a touch-up to paintwork, because no matter how careful you are when the scenery goes in and out of theatres, inevitably in transport it gets scratched and scuffed, and it's about just trying to make sure that paintwork is as polished as it can be. Sometimes some of the timbers get a bit of a battering as well, and they just get strengthened. And there's also some new bits that we make because we've been receiving scripts from the writers and we've been working through, and in part of that creative process, inevitably we look to make additional set items or specific props or even specific costumes. So the planning of all that is well underway.
Cloths is something as well, of course, that needs a certain amount of maintenance because the way they have to be stored means that they can get wrinkled a little bit and they can blister. So touching up those, maybe that will wait until you get them hung in the venue, though.
Yes, we have a what we call a cloth rotation maintenance program. So we've got hundreds and hundreds of scenic backcloths. And the one thing that we struggle for in this country more than we used to is availability of paint frames. Many theatres, particularly the repertory theatres and the producing theatres, would have paint frames where these cloths would be painted. But quite a few workshops have now closed them down or they've taken them out. So to do proper maintenance on a cloth, you need to get it hung, you need to hang it on a paint frame. We do sometimes take our cloths into a theatre and do maintenance during the year hung in a theatre. But we try and rotate the cloth so that once every 3 or 4 years they get a full hanging on a paint frame and a proper touch-up. And then year to year, as you say, we'll do them perhaps in the theatre at fit-up. Or if we sense that they might need a bit more work, we'll take them down to a theatre and hang them in the tower or lay them out on a floor and do a paint call on them then.
I mean, there is no other way to do it. Because of the amount of space they take up, they have to be folded to store, don't they?
They do, and there is no other way around it. Some of our cloths we roll on battens, but again, it takes up an awful lot of space. And when you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of cloths, storing them on pallets in show order is the easiest way, and we can kind of wrap them and keep them dry. But yes, you can get an awful lot of cloths on a pallet rack, as we've discovered here, but it is bursting at the seams.
Now, people will have seen a lot of announcements. Castings have been announced for a number of the theatres. Is that done now? Are you fully cast for all of your shows?
We're well on the way to it. We've got one more day of auditions. We've done 4 days in London and a day in Coventry to capture artists. This is always the big casting time, because once you get into the summer, agents are looking to secure pantomime contracts for their artists, and artists have a better idea of what their autumn diary is going to look like. So this is the time when agents and producers spend a lot of time in dialogue, trying to fill the parts. We've had a very successful audition period. I mean, I am always staggered at the talent in this country, and every year we are inundated with thousands of CVs that we sort through, and it's so sad that we can't see everybody, because the talent is out there. But we have to recruit for the pantomimes, and we know the parts that we're looking for, and we bring in as wide a diverse range of performers as we can to see. And that's the most exciting bit of the process. I've been able to go to some of the audition days this year myself, and as always, the standard is immense, making the choices very hard.
A lot of juggling has to go on, of course, for actors as well, or dancers or whoever, even technical crew members, because they may have contracts that take them up until Christmas. That means they're not able to do panto this year. So that's always a challenge.
It is. The diary juggle is really tricky. I mean, we have such a tradition of panto in this country. A lot of the musical contracts and a lot of the play contracts do tend to pause at Christmas because so many theatres are running pantomimes. But the result of that is you do tend to find that you've got a very condensed rehearsal period. And, a lot of people say, oh, why does panto rehearse so quickly? Actually, it's not because we don't want to spend much money on rehearsals. It's actually because the artists are on other contracts. And by the time those contracts finish, it leaves you just with the best part of 2 weeks to rehearse the shows. So, yeah, people are now beginning to see their diaries, particularly with stage management and technical staff. As we saw last year, there is a shortage of skill and talent. The market is still in recovery from COVID and Brexit. And, there are people in training that hopefully those graduates will start to move into the profession over the next year or so. But there is still a bit of a pinch point in recruiting for technical roles. And what we're investigating here is whether we can support that by offering perhaps some sort of apprenticeship training, because it's apparent that not everybody can afford or indeed wants to go to university to study the technical parts of theatre. So we're investigating ways with our theatres as to how we can encourage training opportunities.
And also with graduates or those who are about to graduate, you do quite a bit of work looking at new talent who haven't actually left drama school yet, don't you?
Yes, we do. I mean, we all know that the route into this industry is as much through experience as it is through education. And we look to give opportunities to those who are at drama school to perhaps come and get their first professional engagement for their CV over the Christmas period on one of the pantomimes. So we work closely with a number of colleges, and we go into those colleges in the autumn and look at usually second-year students with a view to being able to offer them some professional experience on the Christmas season. You learn so much being in the room, working with actors and working with colleagues, and I think everybody knows that this art form particularly is a very live art form. You can learn the fundamentals of it in a classroom, but it's getting up on a stage and performing that actually hones your experience both as a performer and also as a technician.
Okay, so the announcements that have been made for castings up and down the country means that you've done the photo shoots because, of course, they're there in costume. That's a bit of a finely tuned machine in itself, isn't it? And a lot of people might think you have to go to every single venue and, take photographs of all the cast members there. Of course, they're not there now anyway. Tell us how it works.
Yeah, the photo, I think that's one of the areas that's changed the most in the 20-odd years that I've been doing this. When we started, every theatre used to have its own press day, and you'd bring all the cast together and you'd take a wardrobe team up there. We'd meet the local press and the radio, and we'd have photographers there, and it would be a real event. But of course, media has changed so much now, and so much of it is now done digitally. Regrettably, there isn't the sort of press coverage in towns and cities that there used to be. So what we now do is we now centralise our photo sessions as much as possible. So we'll perhaps go to 4 or 5 venues and bring groups of actors, particularly those who we need to feature on the posters and on the artwork, together. And there's great benefits to that. You get to meet them, you get to talk about the script, talk about material. They get to meet fellow performers who may be in their production or other productions. And it's a sharing of ideas as much as a process of capturing images and content for publicity. The logistics of that, as you said, are a real, not a headache, but it almost takes one part of the wardrobe team a full year to get the photo shoot costumes ready. Yeah. Makeup, make sure it all fits. We size as well at those photo shoots, so we're able to size the actors so that we know for the rest of the costume provision for the panto season. We've seen them, they've tried costumes on. And then we've got one more mop-up in August, later on this month, when we're bringing together additional performers over to the Royal Spa Centre, where we'll do a kind of mop-up photo shoot, and that will run over 3 days just to capture the rest of the footage. So, yeah, and I think images and digital content is far more prevalent, and that takes a lot of setup. We bring a camera crew in, they capture a lot of footage, and we're trying to forecast forward as to what the sort of trends are and what content we will need as we get into the autumn and the winter part of the campaign.
Yeah, a truckload of props come every time.
It does, yeah. And that's also another thing. So the props team here are actually pulling the props out for the season and also prepping them ready for the photo shoot. So people's scheduling is very much geared around the August date for photo shoot, when a lot of our hand props and photo props will be required. And then on to prepping them again and the rest of the stuff for the season.
It was certainly a lot easier when you had 2 or 3 venues as well, wasn't it?
It was, and what I always say to people is there was never a plan to actually go right. We're going to take on a dozen or so panto venues and roll them out simultaneously. I think the whole of this theatre company, Imagine, has grown holistically and grown through the work that everybody's put into it, and we've evolved it around the strengths of the organisation and in dialogue with the theatres, because ultimately they're our customers, and what the theatres want and what product works on their stage is different in every venue, and it's really important to have those as open, frank discussions and say, okay, what is the solution that will work here? So yeah, that's I think what caused this.
So how many venues are there this year?
That's a very good question, Martin. It changes on a daily basis. We have 19 pantomimes and we have 5 Santa shows, which are Christmas shows that we roll out for the younger audience. And that was a development that we did with Ian Lachlan, rolled it out about 15 years ago over at the Belgrade Theatre in Coventry, because we could see that there were young members of the audience who actually were a bit intimidated by the scale and size of pantomime. But we know it's really important that children at a young age are introduced to live theatre experiences. And those Santa shows are a real kind of entry-level opportunity for young families and older siblings to come in, experience a 40-minute live show on a subject that they feel comfortable with, Santa, at Christmas. It's interactive on a safe level, so they can join in with singing and performance and get used to coming to the theatre. And we see, after 2 or 3 years, they do move up and come to the panto with their families. So it's that's as important as putting on the pantos.
And the continuing partnership with Trafalgar means that you now have the Glasgow venue this year, which is such a stunning theatre, isn't it?
Glasgow Pavilion has been taken over operationally by Trafalgar Theatres, and it's a beautiful, beautiful variety theatre in the heart of Glasgow. And it has such a huge tradition of family pantomime going back years. They've always done a very successful, almost 100 performance run of pantomime. And like all pantomimes, the Glasgow panto is geared specifically around a Glaswegian audience, and it's very much written for that audience. And that's the great thing, particularly about Scottish pantomime, is it really, really roots itself in the traditions of Scotland and Scottish variety and Scottish panto. And we're reunited with Liam Dolan, who's been at the front of that panto for a number of years. We worked with Liam over at the Palace Theatre Kilmarnock 20-odd years ago and did a whole kind of 10-year run with him there. And it's brilliant to pick up, conversations with performers that you've worked with in the past and who you have a lot of respect for. And pavilion audiences are just fantastic. It's a very, very vibrant, lively, bright spectacle, as you would expect in a city like Glasgow. So it's a really exciting project. We're doing Treasure Island, and we've never done a Treasure Island. And that's another exciting part about working with different venues and different creatives. They bring ideas to the table, so we get to do a panto title that I'm pretty sure we will roll out in other venues as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a traditional title, isn't it? But it's not often done these days. I've certainly never seen it, and that would be good for the audience as well, because it's nice for them to keep the tradition of panto, but see something new.
Yeah, that's right. You've got the wonderful panto at the King's, and there's plenty of other smaller pantos within the Glasgow region. So it's really important that audiences have choice, and Treasure Island will do just that. And what's been great is there's a lot of traditional panto material that is woven into the fabric of the script for Treasure Island, but there's some great characters that we get to work with that we've never worked with before. And I have to say the Pavilion has such a loyal following of audience and also performers. There's some great returners there. So that feeling of familiarity, regardless of the subject, I think will be what will be prevalent in that panto this year.
And obviously, pantos that were really successful, Swansea, for example, last year, which won the Panto Award. The pressure's on, really, isn't it, to maintain that standard at venues like that?
It really is. You feel the pressure. We always know that when you take a venue on, and we spend a lot of time working with theatres who we want to work with, and indeed we are working with, to just try and establish exactly what it is that audience will respond to and what will work financially for the venue and for the production. And it takes a few years to bed it in. And we knew that with Swansea, we had a fantastic opportunity to develop the screen-based productions that we've been working on over the past couple of years. And the response was phenomenal. Sometimes it just needs a kickstart in a venue, not because there's been anything wrong with the previous productions that have been in there, but actually sometimes the needs of the venue have changed and the funding of a venue has changed, and therefore the pantomime takes another dimension in terms of its importance in the season programming. And certainly what we saw in Swansea was a need for the venue to up its ante on the panto in order to protect and develop the audience base that theatre requires in order for it to function successfully. You know, these at the end of the day are buildings that cost a lot to run. Yeah. And more than ever, the pantomime is a fundamental linchpin to the viability and feasibility of the operation of that venue. So we saw that in Swansea. We spent a lot of money on that production. We created that brand new version of Beauty and the Beast. And it worked. Obviously, we got some awards for it, which was great, and it was highly spoken of in Swansea. And therefore, that does put you further up the ladder in terms of the following year. Puts the pressure on because we have to deliver as strong a show, but we know that the audience bookings are very strong, and therefore we have a duty to respond to that and to give them a high-class production.
Okay, talking of the screens, the digital sets, what's the situation with that this year? Are you rolling out more of them? Are you sending the one that you had to a particular venue?
So yeah, our production of Beauty and the Beast that we created at Swansea is going into the Wickham Swan this year. So that's a switch of the physical infrastructure. Of course, the scripts change, and because the venue and the casting usually dictates a different take on the story, but the framework of the show in terms of its physical elements of animation and scenic elements will move across. And then we're actually taking the version of Cinderella that we did last year in Wickham over to Swansea. So we're able to swap those two productions over. Again, a new script written very much for the team at Swansea, Kev Johns and Matt Edwards, who are kind of focal point of that panto. They have a very particular style of comedy, and that will be woven into the story this year. And that's what keeps it fresh as well. We're not just lifting shows off shelves and saying, oh, we'll put that there and move that there. Everything is created based on what we need that venue's panto to be.
In terms of the digital sets, in terms of the animation and the design and so on, long term, I guess it's more cost effective than sets that need to be maintained, but it takes an initial investment, doesn't it? And that can be quite expensive in itself.
It really is. I mean, creating any show, but particularly panto because of its scale, whether you're building a physical set with timber and canvas and steel, or whether you're looking to do a screen-based production, the scale that we're working at, it is an expensive operation, and therefore capitalising the builds of these projects is a big thing. And we've spent over £1 million on 2 pantos, and that's a heck of a lot of investment. And that those shows will last, if you look after them, for a number of years. And you can recover that money. But that's the difference between pantomime and a musical or a play. You'll capitalise the play or the musical, and then you will hope that it'll have a run, either in the West End for a period of time or out on the road. And therefore you're seeing a constant trickle back into repaying your investment. Pantomime, it just takes a bit longer because obviously we're only producing 6 weeks of the year.
In terms of the set builds, though, we haven't mentioned MI or MI, whatever the arm of the company is called. Have we decided what that is yet?
It's that's a very good question, Martin. We always refer to it internally as my workshop,
okay,
because I think it just rolls off the tongue a bit better.
But it's not your workshop.
No, it's my workshop. There's definitely a panto routine in that.
So what's happening with that? Because you talked about some new builds, I think.
We're in the process of building a brand new Snow White set for the Grand Theatre in Wolverhampton, and it's a fantastic design by David Shields. Adrian Jackson, the chief exec up at Wolverhampton, was very clear that he wanted to put a very special and spectacular production of Snow White into the Grand this year, and the set is beautiful. I'm not going to give too many spoilers away, but it's one of those productions, I think, where you see it on stage and it's the gift that keeps on giving. It's a beautifully elaborate, very spectacular, and at the same time very traditional pantomime set. So that's in the workshops at the moment being built. We also have a number of other internal builds for Imagine for our other shows that are being created as well. And that's, again, a big logistical exercise. Everything has to be timetabled because once you build scenery, it has to be stored. There's a number of finishes that have to go onto it as well before it's wrapped and then put onto the wagon to go up for fit-up. So there's a lot of work there. We're also at the time of year where a lot of our stage floors get laid and painted. The floor for Wolverhampton will be taken over there this summer and cut and fitted and painted up. And we have a number of other pantomime floors that have to be fitted and painted. They take such a hammering, pantomime floors, with all the dancing and the slosh and the trucks and the scenic elements that go over it. So a really strong floor is a really important part of it.
How different is it now in terms of new builds and so on to before that sort of MI or My partnership started? Because you'd have to go outside the company every time, would you? To other theatres, maybe?
Yeah, we go out to other theatres and other workshops. And again, unfortunately, one of the casualties of COVID was a number of scenic workshops, particularly those with the specialism in pantomime, closed because there was such a period of time when nobody had any money to build and buy and engage these workshops. So it became apparent that with the volume of shows that we were doing and the volume of builds that we were working on, to have our own arm where we could prioritise. It's not exclusively Imagine, we do a lot of external builds for other clients, but where we could prioritise our own work perhaps in the darker times of the year where you know that scenic workshops aren't so busy, then it was a sensible thing for us to do. We could maintain the standard, we could ensure that the finish and the build was of the quality that we required it to be, and we could keep that, that pantomime scenic build technique, which is not a dying art, but certainly from the artwork side, it's a very specific stylized piece of theatre art, and we could keep working with people in that area.
When we talked about the history of the company, and Mark Thorburn talked about it as well, initially Imagine, as it started as Telltale, began as a set and costume hire company effectively. How much of the work that you do now is still involved with that, given that you've got so many shows of your own? How much do you rent out now?
The amazing thing is that we still have a very strong rental market. We still rent out about 17 productions every year. It's always a juggle, and we always need to be increasing our stock. One of the problems that we're facing this year, of course, is the sad demise of Oldham Coliseum. We had a lovely long-standing relationship with Oldham where we would procure the sets after they'd used them, and some fantastic scenery was created for that venue, and it was a perfect mid-scale size for some of the mid-scale venues that we work with. So unfortunately we don't have that, but there are other theatres that are building sets that we're in dialogue with, and we are also commissioning our own builds. But yeah, that scenic hire was how the whole operation started. The tragedy of rep theatres spending all their money building sets and costumes and then throwing it into a skip was clocked by Ian Lachlan, in the 90s when he was doing the Belgrade run. He was very, very astute and went, this is crazy, this shouldn't all be going in a skip. And it was through his initiative of finding a barn in Banbury and putting a couple of panto sets into it that the kind of company flourished and grew. And it was about servicing other producers with really nice sets and costumes that were new and fresh and bold. I think that was another thing that came out of Ian's vision at the Belgrade. They were very bold, strong, accessible pantomimes, both on stage in terms of the content, but also the way they looked. Panto sets, I think, of the sort of 60s, 70s and 80s, which were circulating a lot throughout the 80s and the 90s and being reused, weren't muted, but they were quite a detailed scenic visualisation, whereas I think what we did at Coventry and what Ian kind of championed was broad brushstrokes, very bright storybook pop-up pantomime scenery, and that's kind of like the style that we've kind of developed as we've gone forward.
And you mentioned the sad demise of Oldham Coliseum. I know that a lot of people there were concerned about the stock of stuff that they did have that they wanted to preserve in some way. You have been able to take some of those costumes particularly off their hands.
Absolutely. In fact, we've taken some of their physical infrastructure as well when they were kind of like trying to keep funding. They want to keep the Oldham Theatre Company alive and keep it trading so that hopefully when they get their new venue the theatre company can move in and carry on trading. So we went up and we bought some of their costumes from the costume stock, and we also bought some of their physical stuff like washing machines, tumble dryers, some of the infrastructure that the building had that's obviously really important when you have a theatre or a theatre company, the sort of things that you're going to need. So we were able to spend a little bit of cash with them, which meant that the kit was going to a good home, and also we were propping up the organisation ready for its relaunch.
So where are you now? I guess it's production meeting time and a lot of planning still going on. What's going to happen over the next month or so?
So we wrap up the first wave of production meetings, which is where we've gone through each production with venue staff and our creative teams, and we've made sure that we're clear on the narrative arc so that the script can be completed. We're clear on what sets are going to work in each sequence, and we know that it's going to fit the venue. We're starting to budget for the lighting and the sound provisions for the shows with the designers for those roles. Stage management is being booked, and we're starting now to hone in on the detail of each show. We know what they all are, and the teams are getting on with the maintenance. Casting and marketing we touched on earlier, that's all in place. But also in the autumn, we all sit down and work out what the strategy for the following year is going to look like, because we're very keen to keep the continuity going. And actually, most theatres now will get their pantomimes on sale as one opens, which is really important for continuity. So we start another wave of looking at titles, ticket pricing, budgeting for next season shows.
That's incredible. So, you're effectively working on 36 pantos, not 18.
That's right. And when we get into September, you do kind of see Sarah start to glaze over a bit as she's suddenly going, I've got a heck of a lot of spreadsheets here now. But that's how early it has to be. A lot of people, and it's flattering that they think that we do just start, September, October, we open the door, pull a bit of stuff out, throw a few friends together and put on a panto. It's anything but that.
And finally, in previous years, since COVID particularly, we've talked about the lack of people on the technical side who are available. You know, a lot of people did leave the industry after COVID because they needed work, they needed money. How is that now? Now, are you still recruiting for this year?
Yeah, we are still recruiting. And as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at ways of trying to support people who want to get into the industry but don't necessarily want to go through university. What we're also looking to support, and it's something that I think the industry needs to address, and we're aware of it, but it's a harder nut to crack, but we're determined to work at it, is how we can help working families, working mums, working dads, who obviously have commitments with children, and therefore work in the theatre industry is harder. And if there are ways where we can look at job share, we can look at scheduling so that people can cover each other's roles. And it's harder on a shorter contract when you perhaps have a 6 or a 7 week pantomime contract. It's harder to make that work, but it's not impossible. And because Christmas is such a family time, then inevitably for the artists and the teams in the theatres who are working on the shows, if we can offer them some flexibility, then that's got to be a good thing. Hopefully that will encourage some people who perhaps have taken a step away from full-time work in the industry to realise that their training, their input is invaluable, and we should be looking to support and encourage any way that we can those people to come back to the industry. So I know we've got there are a couple of pantos where we're trying to work that this year just to see if we can come up with a solution. It's never going to be easy, but that's like all great challenges. You have to find a way through it.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody who is, involved in that aspect of theatre is interested in finding out more, the best place to go is your website.
Absolutely. Go onto our website and then drop us a line. We're always, there are access routes into the company. Anybody who, is able to work but perhaps can't work or is worried about having to work every call, that shouldn't exclude you from at least getting in touch and laying out your circumstances. And particularly if you're near one of the theatres that we produce in. Not just us, any panto producer is aware that these are the things that we want to discover. So what I'd say to people is, if you love theatre and you've got experience in performing or working backstage or supporting technically productions, but you know that the thing that is stopping you from being able to do that is an ability to commit to every performance, that shouldn't exclude you from getting in touch and saying, this is my circumstances, are there opportunities? And I would hazard a guess that most people would go, let's look at that, let's see if we can make it work.
It's August now. I'm just wondering whether you've had your Christmas party yet.
The Christmas party, as everybody knows, is the key to a great Imagine season. It sometimes happens before, it sometimes happens after. Plans are afoot, I know. And it's about finding the space big enough now. Because we used to kind of just move into the meeting room, but now there are so many folk working here that I sense that we might have to put a marquee up on the car park. And
Well, I was going to say, the only people I know who have a Christmas party in the summer, but we're not really out of summer, so it's rather fitting.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, maybe the weather will kind of give us this kind of, let's look out the window now. It's grey and it's bleak and it's raining, so we could actually be in the winter.
Well, let me be the first to say Merry Christmas, and thanks again.
Merry Christmas, Martin. You're very welcome.
Thank you very much. That's it for now. Thank you for supporting this podcast series. Don't forget to subscribe to it, though, just where you normally get your podcast from, and you can check out all of the previous 57 episodes too. In the meantime, make sure you join me next time for episode 59, when I'll be chatting to the man who's involved in countless new writing and musical theatre projects, musical director, orchestrator, vocal coach and composer Dan Jarvis.
Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Just Imagine, the podcast series from Imagine Theatre. And you can find out more by going to www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.